Hey, welcome. Today we're tackling a question that seems super simple at first, but trust me, it gets deep, and it gets deep fast. The question is, what does it actually mean for something to be objectively real?
So, let me ask you something right off the bat. Is a dream real? I mean, you experience it, you feel things. It can totally change your mood for the rest of the day. But is it real in the way this chair you're sitting on is real? Just keep that question in the back of your mind as we go through this.
Okay, to really get our heads around this, we need to start with a solid foundation. Let's begin with a truth that feels totally concrete, something we can all agree on, straight from the world of pure math.
You've heard this one before, right? It's classic geometry. In that perfect, abstract world of math, this is an absolute, objective truth. It's not really up for debate. It's clean, it's perfect, it feels universally real. But what happens when we try to pull that perfect truth out of its perfect world and drop it into ours?
Yeah, this is where it starts to get really interesting. We're about to see what happens when a perfect concept crashes into the complicated reality we actually live in.
Just look at this comparison. On one side, you have that perfect geometric truth, a straight line, simple. But on the other side, that's our world. The shortest path for a person to get from one valley to the next isn't a straight line bored through the earth. No way. It's the winding, bumpy path over the surface. All of a sudden, that objective truth about the straight line, well, it doesn't really apply in a useful way, does it? And this brings us to a huge insight. An objective truth might only be true within its own dimension. What's absolutely true in the dimension of pure math isn't always the practical truth in the dimension of walking through mountains. It kind of suggests that even objectivity has its limits based on the reality we're currently in.
Now let's take that idea and run with it. We're going to apply the exact same logic, but this time not to the physical world, but to the world inside our heads, to things like our dreams and illusions.
And to help us do this, we're going to borrow a really cool concept from the Indonesian language ada. It basically means to exist or to be there. And the core idea behind it is powerful. If you can perceive something in any way, then in some form it exists. It isn't just nothing.
Okay, now that we have this new tool, this idea of ada in our back pocket, let's go back to that first question. Are hallucinations or dreams real? If we can perceive them, do they exist?
And the answer is this fascinating, kind of mind-bending paradox. Yes, they are real, but their reality is that they are illusions. See, an illusion isn't nothingness. It's a specific type of reality. It's something that can be perceived and can have very real effects. It exists as an illusion.
And this is where it all clicks into place. For the person having the dream, that experience is 100% objective to them. The fear they feel is real fear. The joy is real joy. It's all happening. But for everyone else, for you listening to them tell the story, it's just a subjective claim. It's a story that we can't share or verify together.
Which brings us to this absolute gem from the source material. Just let this sink in. Subjectivity is actually objectivity that has not been collectively tested. Wow. That completely reframes how we think about this, right? It's saying that something isn't unreal just because it's subjective. It's simply an objective experience for one person that just hasn't been shared or proven to others yet.
So, what's the point of all this? Why does it matter to think about reality in this, more complicated way? Let's talk about why this is actually super important.
So using this framework, for something to exist, it really has to meet two conditions. First, you have to be able to perceive it in some way, even if it's just a thought or a feeling. And second, its consequences, the cause and effect, can be traced back to our shared reality. A nightmare might cause you to wake up with your heart pounding. That's a very real physical consequence.
And here's the real trap we can fall into. The danger is being too quick to just write something off as unreal or not important simply because we don't get it, or because we can't immediately prove it. When we do that, we create these huge blind spots for ourselves, and our knowledge of the world ends up being totally incomplete.
All right, let's wrap this all up. What are the big takeaways here? First, reality is tied to perception and consequence. If you can see it and it has an effect, it's real in some way. Second, illusions and dreams, they have their own kind of reality. They aren't nothing. Third, what's subjective to a group of people can be completely objective to one person. And finally, embracing this way of thinking helps us avoid falling into easy, simplistic traps when we're trying to figure out what's true.
And that leaves us with one last big idea to chew on. Maybe the most important question isn't just, is this thing real? But instead, given that it exists in some form, How much objective value does it actually hold for us? Something to think about. Thanks so much for joining me.
Hey, welcome. So, what if I told you there's a way to measure what's real? That goes way beyond just calling something real or fake. I'm talking about a system that can make sense of everything from a weird dream you had to the fundamental laws of physics. All right, let's dive right into this awesome idea, functional objectivity. So here's our roadmap for today. We're going to start with a bit of a puzzle. Can an illusion actually be real? Then we'll unpack a whole new way to measure reality, break it down into 5 key pillars, and talk about the ultimate test, time. And finally, we'll see how you can apply all of this to your own beliefs. It's going to be great. All right, first up, the paradox of cause and effect. This is where we get to the heart of the problem. What actually happens when something that isn't physical, like an illusion or dream, causes a very real, very physical reaction. So let me just ask you this right off the bat. Can an illusion be real? Now, I know your first instinct is probably to say, no way, of course not. It's an illusion. But what happens when we actually look at the data? This is where things get really interesting. Just look at this cause and effect chain. You have a purely mental event, right? Like a super vivid dream or an illusion, but the effect is physical and measurable, a racing heart, maybe even real psychological trauma. So can we honestly just dismiss the cause as being not real? From a cause and effect standpoint, it had a very real impact. And here's the crucial part. If we're going to be honest empiricists, people who follow the data, we have to accept all of the data. We can't just cherry pick the easy stuff and throw out the things that are inconvenient or hard to measure. Ignoring the cause of a real physical event isn't good science. It's just ducking the question. So what's the solution here? Well, we need a better framework, a new tool for thinking about this stuff. And that's exactly where the concept of functional reality comes into play. So instead of thinking in black and white, real or not real, we can assign everything a functional objectivity value. And get this, the value isn't based on what something is, it's based on what it does. If it can cause an effect, a physical or functional one, then it has some objective value. It's on the map of reality. Okay, so this sounds cool, but how do we actually calculate this value? Well, this is my favorite part, because this is where it gets super practical. We can measure it using 5 distinct pillars, and each one builds on the last. And here they are, the 5 metrics we're going to use to measure reality. We've got existence, consistency, influence, dominance, and finally, duration. Let's just quickly walk through how these work together to give us a full picture. Let's break down the first 3, because they're like building blocks. It all starts with existence. Pretty simple. The thing just has to be. It has to have some kind of presence. Next up is consistency. It can't just be a random one-off thing. It has to show up reliably or in a pattern. And finally, that consistent presence has to have influence, a real, tangible effect in the world. See how each step makes it feel more and more real? Okay, let's move on to the 4th pillar, dominance. This is where we start comparing things. Dominance is really all about one question. How much space does this thing take up in our reality compared to everything else vying for our attention? This chart is the perfect example. The need to breathe, that's a hugely dominant reality. It's with you 24/7, you can't escape it. But what about that 5-second ghost illusion you thought you saw last year? It might have had a real effect, sure, your heart pounded, but its dominance in your life is practically zero. And that brings us to the most logical way to handle this. The flawed approach is to deny the illusion's effect ever happened. But that's just not true. The logical approach is to acknowledge the effect, but correctly label it as having super low dominance, compared to the constant realities you should actually be building your life around. This brings us to the grand finale of the framework, the 5th and final pillar. This is the one, the big one, that separates the things that are merely objective from the things that are truly foundational to our world. And that pillar is duration. So after we've checked off existence, consistency, influence, and dominance, we have to ask the ultimate question. How long does this thing stick around? This is the factor that can elevate a reality to what you might call near-perfect objectivity. And right here, we get a really powerful benchmark. When an objective reality lasts longer than an average human lifespan, say over 100 years, it hits a kind of gold standard. It's a reality so enduring that it shifts from being a high probability to something that's damn near a certainty for us.
But that brings up a really fascinating thought, doesn't it? What if a law of nature we hold true for our entire lives gets disproven 200 years after we're gone? Does that make its objectivity for us any less real? And the answer is actually a very practical no. Look, this whole framework is built for humans. We don't live for 1,000 trillion years. For our purposes, a reality is perfectly sufficiently objective as long as it holds true for the entire duration we're here to experience it. And that, right there, is just good, objective reasoning.
Okay, so we've got this amazing 5-pillar framework, but why does this actually matter to you right now? Well, it matters because you can take this exact same logic and use it to look at something incredibly personal, your own beliefs.
Seriously, you can take any belief that you hold, something that forms the foundation of who you are, and run it through this 5-step filter. Does it exist? Is it consistent? Does it have a real influence? How dominant is it in your life compared to other things? And maybe most importantly, what's its duration? Is it a fleeting idea or is it an enduring principle? This leaves us with a really cool, kind of mind-bending paradox. Something totally subjective, like a dream, can become functionally objective and incredibly useful, say for a psychologist trying to make a diagnosis. And something that has a real objective effect, like that ghost illusion, can be so non-dominant that it's functionally subjective. It just doesn't matter to your daily life. It's all about context. So I'll leave you with this thought. Now that you have this tool, this 5-pillar framework for actually measuring reality, what's the first belief of your own that you're going to put to the test?
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a paradox that really messes with how we think about reality. I mean, how can something be both real and, well, unreal at the exact same time? It turns out it all comes down to the context you're seeing it in.
Okay, so let's just jump right into the big question. Can something be objective and subjective simultaneously? At first, that sounds like a total contradiction, right? But just stick with me here, because unpacking this reveals a much, much deeper truth about how we decide what's real and what isn't.
To really get this, let's use a super simple example that we've all experienced, a dream. You know, we might call it an illusion or something that's not real, but think about it. It can cause a very real, very measurable physical effect, like a pounding heart or waking up in a cold sweat.
And this gets us to a really crucial point. If something, even just a dream, can cause a real physical change, then you can't logically call the cause non-existent. The physical effect is the empirical proof. It proves that the cause, the dream, was real, at least in that causal sense.
So let's explore the first side of this paradox. We're going to start by looking at how a very real, very objective experience can suddenly kind of become subjective once its context changes.
While you're in that dream, the fear, the joy, that racing heart, none of it feels fake. To you, the person who's actually experiencing it, the event and all of its physical and emotional impacts are completely 100% objective. They are happening to you. But then you wake up, and poof, the dream's objective value just plummets. So why does that happen? Well, because in the broader context of your waking life, it just doesn't hold up. It has low dominance. I mean, it doesn't control your whole day like, say, the need to breathe does. Its duration is short, it's over, and maybe most importantly, it's not a shared experience. So while it's empirically wrong to say the dream didn't happen, it would be logically wrong to make big life decisions based on it. Okay, now let's look at the other side of the coin and see how this whole thing can flip. How can that exact same experience, the one we just called subjective, suddenly become objective all over again? You guessed it, it's all about changing the context.
You know, in our everyday lives, if you tell a friend you had a weird dream, they'll probably listen, but we all treat it as a purely personal, subjective thing. It might be interesting, sure, but it's not really relevant to the practical stuff we have to deal with all day.
But take that exact same dream and tell it to a psychologist. All of a sudden, it is absolutely not irrelevant. It becomes a valuable, objective piece of data that can be used to understand your mental state. The context completely transforms its value and its reality.
Realizing this leads to a pretty fundamental shift in our entire perspective. It kind of turns out we've been asking the wrong questions this whole time, trying to force every experience into one of just two little boxes. So here's the crucial point. We have to stop pitting objective against subjective, as if they're in a battle for what's more real. The actual goal should be to get a complete view, one that acknowledges all the different sides of an experience.
And what this really means is that a truly honest, empirical mindset doesn't get to cherry-pick the data that's just easy to measure. It has to accept all data, even if it's mental or emotional or comes from a direction that makes us uncomfortable. And then the job is to find the context where that data actually becomes meaningful.
So what does this new, more complete way of looking at the world actually look like in practice? How do we apply this huge paradigm shift to our lives?
Well, we move away from that simple black and white fight of objective versus subjective. Instead, our thinking shifts to something way more nuanced. We start asking different questions, like, is my understanding of this thing complete or is it incomplete? And in this specific situation, is this piece of information relevant or is it irrelevant?
This gives us a whole new way to define subjectivity. See, it's not the opposite of real. A better way to think of it is as a potential reality, an objective experience that just hasn't been tested or agreed upon by a wider group yet. A new scientific theory, for example, starts as a subjective idea in one person's head before it gets tested and becomes an objective fact for everyone. This is so important because it allows us to validate personal experiences, things like intuition or trauma, as being real, without having to make them the only basis for every decision in every context. It's really about finding the right place for every piece of data, and that's the key to better communication and maybe even resolving some disagreements.
So if there's one tool you take away from all this, let it be this one. The next time you come across an idea or an experience, try to resist that urge to immediately label it real or not real. Instead, ask yourself a better question. In what context is this experience most relevant and most useful?
And that really leaves us with a final thought to chew on. In our own lives, what ideas or experiences have we maybe dismissed out of hand simply because we were looking at them in the wrong context? It's definitely something to think about. Thanks for watching.